Scott, we finally got the opportunity to get together down here. You've been fighting a really good fight up in Washington on behalf of the industry.
It has been quite a year, but it's good to be down here with you, though, Joe.
Yeah. Can you think back at, and COVID included, obviously, can you think back at any moment in time in your leadership that this work has been so important?
COVID was tough. It was critical, but everyone was going through the same thing on a personal level and on a professional level, right? So there was a big community of people who were fighting that fight together, frankly, the whole world. This one's a little different, right? Because it's very isolated, very focused. Certain businesses are suffering more than others. I think the value of having a trade association engage on behalf of an industry on this one, super important. Probably more important than it's been since I've been in DC. And the disruption to business, I think, has been more than I've seen in DC. And it's not, Joe, just that it's disruptive over the course of the last 3 months. It's like every other day there's something else and something new. So you're constantly fighting different battles and different challenges in different regions of the world, right? So it has been choppy for sure, but we're managing our way through it. And I think at the end of the day, it'll sort itself out and we'll be fine.
You were the very first, if I'm not mistaken, you were one of the very first trade groups to be at the door, White House, explaining the impact on the American public, patients, consumers, and companies.
Right.
Why did you respond so aggressively?
Well, we knew it was coming because the president was pretty clear about what he was going to do. I think a lot of folks watch him, don't take him as seriously as they should. He said he was going to implement tariffs during the campaign. He did it to some degree in the first term. So we were anticipating as soon as he came in that was going to happen in some form. I can't say I knew what the date would be, but we were fully prepared in the off season, if you will, for what was to hit us once he walked in on January 20th. So when they came in, it was very obvious, right? We had the background work done. We knew what the impact was going to be. The tariff levels, changed that dynamic a little bit, but we were ready to go. And on behalf of our companies, we knew it was going to be a hard hit for them, depending on the tariff levels. So as soon as they came in, we started lobbying and making the case, be careful, be cautious. The impact you can have on patients, the supply chain, hospitals, medtech, U.S. innovation, all of that is very, very real. And you have to engage. Some people, Joe, prefer not to engage until it's too late. And that's just never been our strategy, right? Engage early, engage often, be honest, truthful, avoid the hyperbole if you can, fact-based, but make your case on behalf of an industry that's critical to this country.
Especially with this administration, right? I think they don't mind the engagement.
No.
I think they actually welcome the debate. And you brought up an interesting point. Everybody was in COVID together. This seems like a bipartisan type of situation where they're not looking at it as business, they're looking at it as politics as well. And I don't want to make this conversation politics. I do want to discuss, how are you articulating to the administration how medical device tariffs are different than maybe sneakers?
Yeah. So there are a number of ways. Number one, I would say our products are mandatory, they're not optional. If you need a pacemaker, you have to have a pacemaker. If you have an insulin pump, you have to wear your insulin pump. You can't opt not to get it because you want to wait a year or the price goes up too much. So the products are mandatory for every patient who has it. That's different than the typical consumer products. We're priced differently as well. We can't just pass along our costs to someone else if we would like to. Most of those prices are pre-negotiated, package deals, long-term sort of bulk packages with hospitals and clinics and doctors' offices, and it's baked in. And then third, I would say 50% of it is Medicare, Medicaid, VA, right? So federal payers are covering it as well. So even if we were to be able to pass along some of it, Medicare, Medicaid's going to pick it up as well, right? So we're just very, very different than the average consumable product that you might get that may be manufactured in different parts of the world. It's also a very complex supply chain and the ecosystem, and people need to take that into account. So we're different in almost every way, and I would say much more critical to most people who use our products. Very few exceptions to that rule, where you can delay, change your strategy, modify it based on pricing. And that's the theme that people need to understand. When you talk about global tariffs, and you just drop a 10% or 100% or 145% on a bucket of goods, you have to separate out what goods are critical, what goods are not critical for the average everyday citizen, and ours are unique in that respect. So.
And you mentioned supply chain, the interdependency for those of us who are really deep into the medical device of supply chain. I mean, you could look at a device. I think your team recently put something out in the Financial Times that was really impressive and talked about a piece of medical equipment. And you could have anywhere from 15 to 20 countries involved in making a life-saving device that all will have variables in the tariff exercise going on right now.
Yeah, and if you have a product, let's use an insulin pump as an example, that may have 100 different component parts or more connected to it for a kid who has type 1 diabetes and needs that every day. You can't just set up 50 factories around the world and manufacture every single element of it in that same factory and then take it to a finished product. It doesn't make a lot of business sense to do that. So if you're trying to serve markets around the world where everyone is suffering, you have to have a supply chain that is flexible. Some things need to be created closer to the source. Some of it needs to be shipped. And so the policy just needs to understand and recognize that, right? It's not as simple as just manufacturing everything in the United States that's one location and creating that product and providing it to a patient. It's just more complicated than that. And if policymakers don't understand the interdependence of all those component parts, they can't set good policy going forward. And so we're trying, the Financial Times article talked about this, other articles that we've informed recently, we're trying to help people understand that. Because in their defense, most people don't get it, right? If you don't have an insulin pump, you don't understand how it works. But if you do, it's life-saving.
Yeah, and I do believe, regardless of what side of the aisle you sit on in Washington, people care about the constituents.
Yeah.
And, you know, bravo for AdvaMed for giving the education, because we take it for granted every day.
Right.
You know, we look at this and go, well, of course it's that way.
Right.
But this is our lives.
Right.
So educating them is important. Talking about education, when we think about the FDA, and there's all kinds of challenges going on at the FDA right now.
Yeah.
But it's important that, and we know this, when we look at the FDA, we've got biotech, pharma, and medical device.
Right.
And they're all tremendously different.
Right.
And they operate different, and their margins are tremendously different as well. So how do you handle that right now in the middle of all this?
Yeah, it's a little choppy for the FDA right now. Frankly, it's a little choppy for all the federal agencies right now because they're going through this sort of combination of restructuring and DOGE and a lot of things that are going on in those agencies. And I can understand, to be fair, to the administration why they're looking to create a more efficient government, why they're looking to downsize some of the agencies for the taxpayer primarily. There's value in doing that. I've said this publicly and I've said it privately to the leadership as well. Just be careful with some of these public health agencies that you don't take the best people out and leave the people who aren't performing as well, because what happens then is that impacts the healthcare system, that impacts U.S. innovation, that impacts our ability to get products to patients. And so that's the tricky part. I think at FDA right now, they're starting to get a better sense of who's staying and who has left. And then, as I've said, again, publicly and privately, the key is not to look back. What happened, happened, right? The key is to look forward to the gaps that exist. How quickly can you fill them? Can you find quality people to come in and fill those so we can get back to doing the business of medical innovation, right? And if they can do that, and I think they can and they will, we'll be back on a really good track. The last thing I'll say, and I'm a little concerned about this because I've seen some of the conversations about restructuring FDA, putting all three of those areas into one center essentially, right? And having everything flow through the same system. I think that's a problem. I think because devices are so different, right? In so many, we talked about it before, in so many different aspects, right? We're not a pill, we're not a biologic, right? Those should be regulated differently. They should be in their own area. Devices, including now AI and all that goes with the new innovations, have to be set aside. A different type of person needs to review those, a different understanding of the products, the timelines need to be different, the funding of it needs to be different. So we're advocating for separation as it currently exists today, going forward to protect that innovation ecosystem in a way that we think is essential.
You know, it's interesting that that's going on right now, and all they have to do is look at the analog representation in the marketplace right now. So if you think about pharmaceutical companies trying to be medical device companies,
Yeah.
they don't do very well because of
Right.
different culture, different mindset, different pathway, different timelines, different investing,
Right.
different IP, different people get attracted. So those who always try and step into device from pharma, I've worked with those talented people who get
Yeah.
pulled out of device to go into a pharma company
Yeah.
and sit there and go, no, it's a
Yeah.
different culture.
Different.
And I'm going to guess that that would carry through the same way with the FDA.
Yeah.
Again, a hunch,
Yeah.
but if we go with Darwin and capitalism, let's look at the model in the commercial marketplace.
Yeah, you're exactly right. The problem is too few people in the federal government and on the regulatory side understand the difference between those two areas. That's on us to some degree to help them understand it better. But you make a mistake thinking everything is a healthcare product when you don't differentiate the two, and everything about them is entirely different. So we're trying to help people understand what is medtech really, right? How does it impact the healthcare ecosystem, and differentiate ourselves from pharma and bio and in every other area.
Let's drop down now into the stratification of the people who are doing business in medtech, and they're all members of AdvaMed. You've got the large strategics.
Right.
And they'll have obviously different challenges.
Right.
You know, they'll have large headcounts to support that they may have to make decisions on, right? And then you've got the mid caps. So again, all making complex medical device. And then you've got the startups,
Right.
who might not be building product that are as impacted as these tariff situations, but it certainly impacts capital markets,
Right.
venture capital, public markets. I know in January of 2025, I knew of almost a dozen companies being set up for IPOs.
Yeah.
And now that has put a little shade on that capital market, which is really the innovation in medtech.
Right. No question about it. I think for the small startups, there are three things. One, the capital markets you mentioned that are really critical, but then there's the regulatory pathway and the payment pathway. The regulatory pathway is a little more clear than it's been. The payment pathway is still a little bit choppy. And if you add the disruption that you mentioned on the capital markets, it makes it very difficult for small companies, for startups, to continue to drive forward right now. The other thing, Joe, the strategics are always looking at these startups. And the way our ecosystem works is that tends to be the buyer, right? They look at those products, they let the innovation occur there, and then a big company comes in and funds it, buys it, and takes it to market and expands it to patients more aggressively. In an era where there's a tariff burden added to the large strategic companies, they begin to shrink jobs, research and development, and innovation because they have to keep their company operational and functional and profitable, right? That has an indirect impact on the small startups as well, because that innovation ecosystem is affected in a negative way. So indirectly, I've cautioned people, right, about the impact of tariffs on the entire ecosystem, particularly the small companies, because of the innovation cycle and how it works inside of our industry. So it's a big concern right now. I don't want to be overly pessimistic about it though, Joe. I think we're going to get through it. I would say 30 to 60 days, we'll have a better sense of where we are. It's not optimal, but as you know, as well as anybody, this is an incredibly resilient healthcare component, right? Component of the healthcare system, medtech is. And we'll find our way through it. You would just prefer not to have the disruption in the short term, so.
And I'm in total agreement with you there. And every once in a while, and I don't wish this on the people who are really suffering right now,
Yeah.
it's really important that we continue to go through these challenging times, because it does tend to galvanize and clean out certain parts of the industry that maybe it requires that.
Yeah.
And I also think that where we had no control over COVID, we've got a lot of control over this, and I don't think it's a structural issue in the country right now. It's a choice for America First trade.
Right.
And so this can almost be an on-off switch at any point in time, which is sort of comforting to me.
Yeah, I agree. And you saw that early this week, right? When the president kind of changed his language about the Fed, changed his language about where we are with China, changed his language about the importance of the tariffs as well. You saw the markets kind of come back, right? And so you're right, there's a bit of an on-off switch. There's a dimmer switch maybe too, where you can turn it up a little bit, down a little bit. And we've seen that play out, which is why I'm not pessimistic, right? Other than just being a great resilient industry with a lot of great business leaders, I think the president's going to come back around to supporting innovation in a way that's helpful. So.
Scott, we talk about a lot of the dynamics going on in the U.S.,
Yeah.
but AdvaMed's a worldwide organization with influence
Right.
well beyond our borders.
Yeah, we're everywhere. We have an office in China, I think, as you know. We have affiliate organizations throughout Europe, in South America, Central America, and in Canada as well, where our conference was last year. I think it's particularly important right now because the tariff issue is not just a U.S. issue, right? It's everywhere. A little breaking news Friday morning. It looks like China, and I think a lot to do with some of the advocacy work we're doing there, is going to have their own set of exemptions from tariffs. It feels like an element of that is going to be in medtech, and we've argued really aggressively with the Chinese officials that they need to exempt medtech products on behalf of patients as well. So we're starting to see some movement there, and I can imagine by the end of the day, maybe first of next week, we'll see a chunk of exemptions that might come through in medtech, maybe in the diagnostic space, to some degree in the imaging or x-ray space as well, and so we're very focused on that. And then as you look to Europe, we've been making the argument in every country, but particularly in Europe, at the end of the day, why don't we just all move to a zero for zero tariff model, right? So zero tariffs from Europe on us, though they're already really low, zero tariffs from the US to Europe, and let's everyone compete against each other. We feel very confident, right? All of our companies feel very confident. Just let us compete fairly, evenly, no tariffs. Let us serve patients as best we can. Let's impact people's lives, and the best companies are going to win, right? And that's the way the system should work. So in Mexico, we're arguing now for the same thing. And in Mexico, the president gave us some of a window of exemption, right, by allowing us to use USMCA to carve out some of those products. In Canada, we're looking at issues in Canada as well. But the same thing, let's just go zero for zero. Let's get rid of all these tariffs and let companies operate close to each other, keep the supply chain connected, Canada, US, Mexico, one big continent, right, and serve the patients better. So if we can get to a zero for zero model with a sort of a humanitarian exemption concept in place, right, that's the best place for everyone to land. We've told that to the White House and the president and everyone else in the administration. And I know there's a bigger issue at play here on trade imbalances, but on behalf of patients, on behalf of medtech, I think that's the place we need to land.
And that's just so clearly obvious, right? If we can remove the friction, it doesn't need to be there. And it's not like margins in medtech.
Right.
Or the same margins in other industries like pharma.
Right.
Right? Like our margins are tight as heck.
They're tight. And that's fine, to be honest with
Absolutely.
you, right? That's how we operate. We like to have a competitive landscape. We don't get 20 years of exclusivity on a device that comes to market. Bring something to market, about 5 years, you're going to have something that looks just like it, competing against it in the marketplace, which drives down cost. If you look over the course of our history, most of our products are deflationary. They come on the market, the prices go down. Competition works. Let it work, right? Don't treat us like other elements of the healthcare system. I think that's a really important thing for people to understand.
You know, you're always so humble on behalf of AdvaMed, and I don't think enough people understand the work that goes into this, and you and your team's contribution to the success of this industry. I know, because you and I try and chat frequently, and we've been trying to get together now for quite a few weeks.
Yeah.
If you can, without divulging too much, the frequency that you've been in the White House, the frequency that you've might had exposure and to the president himself.
Yeah.
Can you share some of that, what it's been like?
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey, not new to me. I've been around this game arguably way too long, right?
But please don't go anywhere.
Yeah. But I enjoy it. I mean, I love this industry. I love working on behalf of the industry. But in a situation like this, you have to talk to every single person who's willing to sit down and talk to you at the most senior levels of government, right? So that goes from the new FDA commissioner, the new CMS administrator, the new secretary, who I've had a great conversation with recently, who understands our issues and the challenges we face. You move over into the White House as well, and you look at the National Economic Council chairman, Kevin Hassett, had a good conversation with him recently. We've spent some time with the head of USTR, the U.S. trade rep, talked about the uniqueness of our industry, the challenges we face. He's a sharp guy, very much understands it, but has a big job right now that he's trying to sort it through. And we're on our way to see the Treasury Secretary, we think, soon to talk about the issues with him as well. You go through the entire apparatus all the way up to the President of the United States. And we've had conversations all the way up to try to help them understand the value of this industry, help the president understand what it means to this industry, the tariffs and other things connected to tax policy and other things. And listen, at the end of the day, the president is a smart guy. And whether you agree or disagree with the policies, my view is he's trying to do what he thinks is the right thing for the country. So you have to engage with him and have those conversations with him and understand where there's alignment, but also educate folks who don't live our world every day about why we're different and why we're unique. And so the discussions we've had with the president's chief of staff, with the president himself, this is a unique industry, a uniquely American industry. It's a uniquely valuable industry, and patients are very, very dependent on it. So those conversations have occurred, they'll continue to occur, and we'll talk to everybody who's willing to talk to us about this industry.
Well, Scott, I always appreciate your time. I know our industry appreciates your time, and there's not a better person to have in the post taking care of us.
Well, I appreciate that. Appreciate your partnership on this issue, so many other issues as well. And I'll say this is a uniquely great American industry, right? And everyone needs to support it. If we don't, we'll pay a price for that. But I think we're on the right track.
Agreed. Thank you, my friend.
Good.
I'm Joe Mullings from 160 Studios. Be well.